Hi, everybody. I want to reintroduce myself. My name is Alex Kane. I'm one of the two assistant fire marshals for the San Diego Fire Rescue Department. Before I get into my conversation, I want to give you a little background on me. I've been in the fire service since the age of 18. I was a student firefighter, a reserve firefighter, and I got hired with the San Diego Fire Department. I spent most of my time serving the Mesa up here, Hillcrest, North Park. I lived by San Diego State for 10 years, so like Chief Logan was saying earlier, this matters to me, as it does to all my colleagues. I spent 23 years working the fire engines. I've been to multiple brush fires, these types of fires, and now I have a different job. My job is to get out in front of these fires, to meet you all, give you the perspective from a firefighter that has experience doing the firefight, and then show you the ways and help you find the ways to give us a fighting chance to make your home as fire hardened as possible. So today we're going to take an opportunity to do some fire prevention work. Along with that, we're going to review what happened at that fire. There's a couple things that Chief Eddie brought up that I want you to remember. We're going to walk through this together. I'm going to tell you a story. One of the first things you got to remember is that we're talking about perfect San Diego weather when this happened, okay? I'm going to bring it up a couple times because I want you to remember that. The second thing that we're going to talk about is that right when Engine 17 is a key component to the story I'm going to tell you today. But they were the first ones at scene, and they were the first people to get water on the house that was lost. The reason why that's important, because that house was on fire within moments of their arrival, and they diverted up the hill. We'll kind of talk a little bit more about that. The third thing I want to talk to you about was they ordered fixed wing support. That's the airplane that comes over and drops fire retardant. That airplane drops fire retardant from the sky. As we start talking about the case study, we're going to realize that that would have done nothing to this home. So that being said, if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, before we kind of get into the case, I want to talk about the disaster sequence. This was a matrix that Dr. Jack Cohen came. He passed away, but he was a fantastic contributor to education regarding wildfire. His biggest concern was what happens when big fires, why do we lose so many homes, what happens to the fire resources? And if we look up here, I'm going to explain it to you. There's two parts. There's conditions, and then there's the consequences of the conditions. So at the top, we talk about severe wildfire potential, extreme fuels, weather, and topography. Living in San Diego, we are constantly living in this state. Once again, it was perfect San Diego weather, and that fire started and blew up within a matter of minutes. Engine 17 was at scene quickly, and it was already spotting over the road. So we are constantly living in this type of situation. Giving ignitions, regardless of how it starts. We have extreme burning conditions, high intensity and growth rates. That fire that you just saw that Chief Eddie was explaining, it blew up. That's what we say blew up means it's growing extremely fast. We're living with lots of fuels in our canyons. Our department does a great job of putting fires out, but the dead and dying fuels remain. So it's building up. We have wood piles building up. And then once it gets into the home, like it did, the potential from home to home transition is very high, especially when you start adding wind to the condition, lower relative humidities, and higher temperatures. Down here are the consequences. This is really important because I know a lot of people are asking questions like, what was the fire department's response? How did the evacuations work? Just keep in mind, when these engine companies show up, they quickly become overwhelmed because this fire is moving so fast, they're trying to get a handle on it and figure out, okay, what is the plan? Let's create a box. Let's keep the fire within that box, and it's continually moving. I've been on fires where we pull up, we deploy hose lines, and before we actually put water on the fire, we're like, guys, pick it up. We're going to drive up a block, and we're going to go up one more block, and then deploy there because the fire is gone already. And then we're talking about ember cast. The ember cast can go up to 2 miles, like Chief Eddie was saying. The effectiveness of the first-aid firefighters is reduced tremendously. Their concern is for life and safety, so it's really hard to determine, hey, how are we going to start putting water on this fire when it's going towards the homes? So they're going to be diverted to those homes to try to evacuate and notify. that shows that the effectiveness is reduced or even non-existent during these moments. This was a day that was perfect weather. How would this fire be different if it was 20 mile an hour gusts, a 35 mile an hour sustained wind, Santa Ana, very common conditions that we live with here, right? And then once it gets into the homes, it has not much to do regarding how much brush you have around, because a home is a fuel. Once it's on fire, it's all about separation distances. Like I said, I used to live over by San Diego State. My neighbor, I could talk to him from my window. Some of these houses there is more separation, but once we get into these neighborhoods, it's very close. Within 10 feet, structure transmission is extremely high. Now that we know what we just talked about, what can we do to give the firefighters a fighting chance so they're not fighting our house fire, they're fighting the wildfire that's threatening the neighborhoods? Next slide, please. So the best method or the best tactic that we can do as homeowners is to harden our home and ensure that we have defensible space around our home. In the past, we've talked about defensible space in regards to brush, but I want to talk about defensible space in regards to combustibles within 0 to 5 feet from our house. What we have here is a schematic and what it looks like. We have they call it zone 0 like. So what we need to do within the fire service, this is a new concept, relatively new over the years. We're still using different terms. We're getting better at that. So we're calling it zone 0, the home ignition zone. And essentially we want to remove all the combustibles from that zone. When we do the case studies, I'm going to show you how the zone 0 and having combustibles within the zone 0 made that home extremely vulnerable to embers. We're going to have more, so I didn't forget, we're going to have more information at the tables out there regarding this and pamphlets, and we can discuss this if you like regarding your homes. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into the case study and how this home was affected by the Montezuma fire, the sequence of events that occurred, and what the firefighters did. So the home is located at the top of the valley off of Montezuma Road. It's facing the south, and what we know is that when you're facing the south, it's a drier, the sun is affecting this slope more often. You have lighter, flashier fuels that have lower dead fuel moistures, meaning that they're more ignitable, and when they burn rapidly. The home that we're studying today, the home ignition zone, contained combustible materials around the 0 to 5 feet. Now, I'll be honest with you, I teach this stuff. My home also has combustible materials between 0 and 5 feet. So hey, here's the thing, and this is if I come out and I come to your house and we're talking, I would love to inform you from a fire prevention perspective. We're just looking for progress. We're not looking for perfection. Any little bit helps those first responders, and it buys you time so we can get to your house before it's already within the house. Once again, perfect weather. That means that this type of fire can happen at any given day. This was probably the best situation possible to have this type of fire. Because we had any wind, any more wind, like Chief Eddie was saying, dozens of homes could have been lost. Next slide, please. So my job was to go out and see how the fire affected the community. And one of the things that I discovered was that there was a home that was damaged, potentially lost. I went into the home and I conducted a damage assessment on the home. And essentially what I do is I walk around the house, I look for different factors, I look for signs of fire, and as I approached the house, I started walking, and I said it's on the delta side, and let me explain what that means. When you go to a house and you look at the front, it's the alpha side, that's how we call it. And just clockwise you go around. Bravo, Charlie's in the rear, Delta is to the right of the home. As we're walking down towards the Delta side, I see a couple of things that are of interest to me. I see that there is debris left from the fire located there. It's kind of pixelated at my place. Is it a pretty good view? Can you guys see out there? Okay, perfect. What I noticed that was significant, a couple things from this picture. You have the white demarcation on the siding of the home. That indicates to me that there was a high intensity fire that was burning cleanly, but then it had all the right conditions. It had fuel, heat, and oxygen. Above it, you see the demarcation, the soot. I look over to the right, you have some wood siding that has charring. And then you have like a planter table located there that had deep charring. The deep charring was actually underneath the table, and that's significant. These materials, combustible materials, we call that a receptive fuel bed. And what is it receptive of? It's receptive for these low intensity fires that fly through the air and they land there. Undetectable for most people, but they're just smoldering against the house or on these combustible piles, and then fire starts. Fire started in this collection of combustible material here, and then it started spreading towards this table. You can tell by the charring beneath the table. So let's go and move to the next slide. So I want to show you a different angle from this debris pile. Now I'm on the Charlie side. I'm looking back towards it. The ignition source is that arrow going down. That was the same area, but it leads to underneath the deck. So they had a beautiful deck that looked at the canyon, and what I noticed was the charring. If you look at this beam that's going across, the deeper, we call it alligatory, that's signs of heavy, intense fire. And here's the things that I learned from this view. We did have a wind of 8 miles per hour, and it was coming out of the northwest, and it was feeding through Montezuma. As it approached the home, whenever we have like a choke point, or we have a thing called the Venturi effect, where it actually accelerates the wind. We had a debris pile burning underneath the deck. The wind comes to the deck, it actually speeds up the process. It's like a bellows, it's blowing air on this fire. And then now this fire is burning freely underneath this deck. When I said, remember about how the first fire engine company requested fixed aircraft, they dropped from the top. If you have a deck that is free burning fire, it's not effective. This house was extremely vulnerable, but a lot of our houses, if not all of our houses, are extremely vulnerable. But there are certain things out there that we can do that are low cost, high impact things to buy the firefighters time. Because if the firefighters had 1 gallon of water to put on that low intensity fire that was right up against your house, they could have extinguished that fire. So let me talk a little bit more about this. When we look at the deck, there's some insulation on the ground. This insulation was insulating the interior of the home, that was the dwelling part of the house. And the insulation actually was shielding the floor panels. You can see that by the different colors in the demarcation and the charring. That's important because one of the things that we would come out there to evaluate this would be like, you need to get 1 hour sheeting underneath your deck. That would make a big difference with how this fire spread. Next one, please. This, as we progress down the deck, I'm coming along, just like if it was this deck, I started here, and by the time we got to right about the middle of the deck, we started to see that the deck became an exterior access area, so there was no need for insulation, so there was no shielding. The deck joists are now much closer together. Like I said, it was already like a blowtorch effect. And once it got to this section of the deck, it was free burning, it had plenty of combustibles, it had plenty of fuel, and the fuel was all tightly next to each other. When fuels are tight next to each other, it's called agglomeration, and what that means is that the intensity increases significantly. When you have two fences, I'm sure some of you share a fence with a neighbor, and you want to have the beautiful side of your side, and they want to have the beautiful side of their side, and you have two decks really close to each other, those are going to burn a lot hotter than in one single deck. one single fence. Something to consider. Once we got down to here, we noticed a penetration into the home. This penetration was to an exterior portion of the deck, the one that has the arrow, but right behind it was the first penetration into the living space. One of the things I also want to say was there was no detectable tree litter, and when I say tree litter, I'm talking about tree leaves and pine needles and those various types of things. There was no detectable tree litter underneath the home. It was clean there. You can tell by I was looking around at the soils. That's a good indicator of validating our assessment of the home. Next. So this was right behind that first penetration. And once again, we have the fire had burned through the flooring because it was not insulated, it wasn't shielded, and it entered the home. Once again, the Venturi effect and fire dynamics. Fire wants to go up and it wants to go out. It's already going at a fast rate, so already like a blowtorch, and then now it penetrates the house. Now the fire is racing through the home. The firefighters were reporting extreme fire growth at that fire. Like I said, we looked at that video. They were at that house within 15 minutes, and they were in a serious firefight. And the one thing I want to actually say is when we came up here, you guys stood up and clapped for our efforts. I'm going to go back and share that with the captain and the crew of Engine 17. With no doubt, the actions that they took that day say, who here lives in Alvarado Estates? Okay, I'll tell you what, if Engine 17 didn't do what they did, the chance of structure, destruction, transmission is very, very likely very high. Those firefighters, and I'll move on after this, but I just think it's something to talk about. Normally when we go to a structure fire, we'll go through one bottle, and our bottle is 45 minutes, and that's activity that's working really hard. By the time you're done, you're pretty much very tired, and we call it you're gassed. Well, the Engine 17 crews went through 4 bottles. 4 bottles with 4 people before they really had to support. And they fought that fire, and they kept that fire contained to the house. So that was an awesome thing. I appreciate you standing up. I'm going to let Captain Higgins know too. Once it made an entry into the home, the effects of the fire now became like an incinerator. When I walked through the home and I looked at it, actually penetrated the house 3 times. The effects of the interior contents was that of melting effect. Not common in structure fires. Been in plenty of structure fires. I know we get some of that, we get a lot of that, but this was a different level. The reason why I bring it up is because this house was vulnerable, just like many houses, like my house is vulnerable, your house is probably vulnerable. This house was almost lost before the firefighters could do anything about it. If there's something that we can do is if we can clear that 0 to 5 feet and give those firefighters a chance, trust me, they will do whatever it takes to put water on that fire and get your house and save your house. But we got to give them a fighting chance to do that. So, what can we do? There are some things that we can do. For example, the vent screens. This is on the Delta site also. When I came across my first, idea that how this fire spread was through the vents. I went up to the vent and I ran my hand across the screen, and the screen was just cluttered with embers. The embers were extinguished. It was after the fire, of course. And I felt the size of the mesh. The mesh was beneath 1/8 of an inch, and that is what we're recommending. It did its job. The fire did not enter the home through the vent. For me, it was validation of what we're saying out there. Hey, you know what? Get your vents checked. Change your vents. It works. It worked on this house. The reason why this house had fire in it was from underneath the vent. Next one. Another example of how home hardening works. We have non-combustible siding in this picture, and we have dual glazed, dual pane windows also. You would think that the windows are a weak point, and so would I. But when I looked inside the home and I looked at this area, there was no fire penetration on that side. Keeping in mind that we have the white demarcation there, that's that sign of high intense fire. The stucco and the dual glazed windows kept the fire from entering your home. It bought the firefighters time. It was the vulnerability beneath the deck, and it was the accumulation of material in the home ignition zone. That was the main cause of loss. Another thing I noticed in this picture, if you look on that chimney there, that brick, you have all that frost check. They tried to drop on that house. They dropped fire retardant in the house, and it was unsuccessful. This is a lot of the stuff I just talked about. I'm not going to go back over that, but there are some things over here. When we start thinking about hardening our home, this is a community approach. We can't look at it as like, hey, my parcels have defensible space and it's hardened. but yet my neighbor over here is not. It's not going to do much for you. So I'm really excited to see the people here. I'm excited about the fire safety councils. They're doing the right thing. We're educating people. And it's a community approach as opposed to parcel-centric. We're looking at these low-cost, high-impact things. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to work towards that. It can take a long time, but we can show you what the lowest cost, high-impact things that you can do to protect your home. And as I said before, when we think about home hardening and defensible space, you got to look at it as dials. You may not have as much defensible space, so you might have to turn the home hardening dial up. Your home hardening dial may be kind of in the middle with your defensible space turned up. These are hard concepts to understand. The San Diego Fire Department and the county are here to help you with these home assessments. I'll talk a little bit about the home assessments, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so we were out in North Park, South Park area, and we were training up firefighters. We just trained up. We have probably about 60 firefighters on staff that have the knowledge, the training, the experience to conduct these home ignition zone defensible space inspections. It's our job to come out and we can come out and look at things and say, hey, this paper up against your house is not a good idea. When it gets an ember, it can burn up, and then it goes into your vents. We have the experience to kind of forecast what would happen with these types of things. We can tell you, hey, most likely because of where you're located on the canyon, fire will come up this way due to the normal air, wind patterns within San Diego. It's really focused on this corner of your house. And those are things that we offer, and the fire marshal and the fire chief want to encourage fire safety councils. And the San Diego Fire Rescue Department is willing to go out, meet the fire safety councils, and conduct these home ignition zone inspections free of charge. So we really want to encourage the community coming together and creating these councils, start to speak the same language, start to understand what the real problems are, and make changes in a community sense. That's it? Okay. That's it. There's more information we'll have at the table. I'll be around. Once again, my name is Alice Kane. Thank you very much for making the effort of coming out tonight. And let's go into the questions.